So welcome to the first ever ride review chat between the beanpole and the beefcake. That was your suggestion.
Two very different riders on the same bike.
So given this is our first attempt in this sequence, we'll put up on the screen the discussion points today for those of you who want to jump around. So we're going to go through the build and frame quality, the design, the specs, the geometry, and then Neil and I will share our riding experiences. But of course, we'd appreciate people's feedback. Constructive feedback is always ideal.
Get off the internet, you dickhead!
And before we get into this discussion, Neil, I need to preface this video with two things. The first one is, why do we have this thing built up and why are we reviewing it after it came with the through axle hole issue?
Oh, through axle hole issue, yeah. So we've gone ahead with the project because we ran a poll on the YouTube video last time and 53% of people were keen on us continuing the project. So we have.
Okay.
We've built it up, we've got it ready, and we've both ridden it for about I had 3 weeks on it, you had probably 4 or 5.
Yes, I hogged it. Even
hogged
longer,
it.
I reckon.
Yeah. I wanted it back. But anyway, we've both had a good ride on it now, and I think we're both well versed to give our impressions of it now.
The other thing I wanted to preface this video with is a lot of channel supporters will be used to the fact that we normally take a frame in when it's given to the channel, starting with the frame, to a carbon expert, being Gary from Carbon Steed, and they will be used to this given the fact that we've been doing it on the channel since we started with the Winspace project in 2020. So Neil, have you been wondering where the scan is?
Absolutely, mate. Okay. I love the scan.
Okay.
I'm a tech geek, so
okay.
Yeah.
So the criticism that these frames are hand-picked because they're sent to the channel was growing, and rightfully so. So in order to mitigate this, the last project, which was the Elves Falath Evo, I bought one of their frames anonymously and took that in to see Gary for inspection. And reflecting on that process, I feel like there's not much to like that came out of that last video.
It was messy, wasn't it?
It was messy. The audience feedback wasn't that positive. The emails and messages that I got from channel supporters wasn't that positive. So I think the audience, you're right, it was messy. The relationship with the Elves distributor, burn a bridge there with a really good guy. And additionally, from my point of view, editing and making that video just felt a bit icky. I didn't enjoy it. So I feel like with the whole scan, we're at the end of the road. And that's why we haven't scanned this frame. And I think people out there watching will just have to take with a pinch of salt the perspective of the quality of the frames that are sent to us.
Yes.
Which brings us to agenda item number 1, Neil, which is this frame quality and the build.
The build quality, yeah. So I built this up with a friend of mine down in Caloundra, Sean from the Bike Tailor, and I was present while we built it. We put the whole thing together. I did a lot of watching and while he built it, and I can tell you a fair bit about it. So a few things to remember. It is a UCI approved frame, 6-year warranty, 110 kilo rider limit. It's made out of Toray 800 fibre, which is one of the top spec carbons out there. When we were building it, we basically had no nasty surprises at all. An interesting thing to note, the GP 5000 tubeless tyres, super easy to get on these rims, so people will be very happy with that. We popped them on by hand, no tyre levers involved, and they actually inflated without a compressor with no tubeless sealant in there. Bottom bracket tolerances, headset bearing tolerances, fantastic. We had no gripes, everything seated well, everything was nice and snug. The through axle holes, they were perfect.
Okay, this time? Good.
Absolutely perfect, yeah. The alignment.
I would have been very surprised if they went.
If we had a double up of that issue, no, that was clearly an outlier, that frame. This one was bang on, and as it should be. A couple of interesting things to note, which were really good. The seat post tolerance into the frame is fantastic. I deal with seat posts all the time that are slipping and moving, and D-shaped posts which have a habit of sitting off square and that sort of stuff and being loose in the frame. This one is almost like a vacuum fit. It is so tight. It's perfect. One little quirk we had was a bit of strange positioning of the seat post wedge clamp. There's a bit of grip material that's put on the front of the seat post to help it grab, and it's too low down on the seat post for our frame. So that should be a little bit higher up so that it's actually gripping. Even with my fairly high seat height, up around 755 millimeters on a 54 centimeter frame, the wedge clamp is not actually sitting on that grip material. So that stuff probably needs to be further up along the seat post, but that was like the only criticism we had. The rest of the build was very easy.
The second thing I wanted to talk about, Neil, is the design. There's 3 things I want to talk about here. First one is paint. So they offer 4 standard options, which is a lot of options compared to some other bike manufacturers. And they also offer custom, which is what we've done.
Yep.
which is 500 Australian dollars, which seems pretty reasonable to me.
Especially with the quality of the custom job, it is really nice.
It is nice.
Yeah, it looks nice. Yeah.
Which does add weight to the frame, which is going to coincide with my second point, and that is, I feel like this, from a design perspective, the surface area of this aero bike, it's not as muscular as mean as a lot of others, like say the Elves Falath Evo or the Winspace T1500, but it does carry the same weight or a similar weight to those bikes. So the Yoeleo R12 with the frame and fork, we weighted at 1630, a Winspace is 1640, an Elves Falath Evo is 1680, a SEKA Exceed RDC, which has probably a similar surface area, although I will preface this by saying the SEKA Exceed is, you can almost squash that carbon in. It's a thin layer versus this, which we'll get to, being quite a stiff bike.
Yep.
Possibly a much thicker, stronger layer.
Could be.
But the SEKA Exceed is 1270, so 300 to 400 grams lighter than this bike here.
So I guess the takeaway from that is if you're looking for an ultimate weight weenie frame, probably not your frame.
Probably not your frame.
But probably built very strongly is the counter argument. So if you're a heavier guy or you're putting a fair bit of force through it, or you want stiffness, which we're going to talk about later.
Yes.
That's where it exceeds the Exceed.
Well, I like what you did there. You planned on that one, didn't you?
I slid that one in, yeah.
Yeah. And the final one is the seat stays. So this is the only aero bike that I have ridden, I believe, that doesn't have dropped seat stays. They are slightly dropped, I guess you could say, but not where it typically sits. And that has, for me, had an impact in the rear, which we'll discuss later.
Yeah, aerodynamically, I don't have a wind tunnel in front of me, but this is certainly not the way that most companies have gone with aero frames. They've all gone to drop seat stays for the aerodynamic benefit as well.
Yep.
So it's an interesting choice.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, a little bit reminiscent of a Lapierre or a Madone or something like that in the back end, isn't it?
And in terms of the specs, so we can keep this ball rolling pretty quickly, we'll put them up on the screen.
Geometry, yeah. So I'm fairly uniquely placed to talk about this. So this one's a medium. So it's got a stack of 550 and a reach of 386, which is nothing terribly unusual for a sort of a race geometry bike. One thing to take note of is the stack in the front. This bike has a compulsory 10mm bearing cap on top of the top bearing, and then it's got another one which has to sit underneath the cockpit, which is another 10mm thick. Those together do inflate the effective height of the bar a little bit. So you would, if you were comparing apples to apples, you'd say that this one's probably more got an effective stack height of about 560, which puts it it's not too aggressive in the front end. It hasn't been made ridiculously low, which I kind of like. For me, that actually made it fit me much better than a lot of other hyper aggressive aero bikes with a super low stack. So it's a little bit deceptive in the height at the front end. 73 angles, so that's another thing I like about this bike. Seat tube angle 73 degrees, head angle 73 degrees with a regular 43mm fork rake, regular bottom bracket drop of 72mm, regular wheelbase. Everything was kind of normal, which is one of the things I really liked about it. It's nothing, they haven't gone quirky with the geometry in any strange way, and that's, I think, why it handles so well. My impressions of the handling were so good with it. The other great thing about this thing is the adjustable sliding setback on the seat post. Now, I love this. It's
right up a bike fitter's alley.
Yeah, it's right up my alley. Adjustability is like front and center for me for these things. So it's got 40mm of layback adjustment on that sliding rail system.
Wow.
Yeah, I've seen a few other bikes with similar systems. This one looks like it's done really, really well. It probably adds a little bit of weight to the post because it's got a couple of threaded steel inserts inside, but the adjustability is fantastic. So I run this thing with 0 offset when I ride it, and you run it with about 20mm of layback, and it's just 2 Allen bolts through the top of the thing, and it just slides back. It's a great system.
Yes.
And we've had no issues with saddle angle slippage or anything. Have you haven't had any issues with it?
No, not at all.
No, nothing has moved on it. So yeah, it's been really good. It'll take a 32mm tyre as well. I know a lot of people will be interested in the tyre clearance. We've got some 25 GPs on this thing here at the moment, which are about 28mm effective, maybe 29 wide, but it will take a 32 if you want a bigger tyre on it. So yeah, geometrically speaking, no great surprises. 2 things to be aware of: the sliding setback adjustment and the extra height in the front end from those spaces. Yeah.
Okay, good. Riding experiences. So what we're going to do here, we're going to give it a rating system, Neil.
Yep.
I'm going to give it a score out of 5, and you're going to give it a score out of 5, and then we're going to have a combined beefcake
We're going to have a
and
fight
bean
about
pole.
We'll have an argument.
Score
about
out of 10.
Yes.
Yeah. So the first point is comfort. what would you score it out of 5 for comfort?
So I suspect we may differ here.
Yes.
Yes. So I'm being, remember, 62 kilos.
80.
80,
Yeah.
80, man.
Yeah.
What have you been eating? So 80 kilos. So there's 18 kilos in us. Your seat height is 15 mil lower than mine,
Yes.
give or take. So there's less seat post out of the frame. All of that contributes to what we're probably going to tell is two quite big differences in the comfort.
Yep.
I found this thing fine. Absolutely fine. I did one 3.5 hour ride. Admittedly, I didn't do many 6 and 7 hour rides, but I had no issues on coarse chip seal. I thought it was quite comfortable in the back end. Bear in mind, I had the tubeless tyres at 60 odd PSI. You probably had them a bit harder.
Yep.
I would give this probably a 4.5 for comfort. I found it totally fine.
Well, that aligns to what most people say. I feel like I'm an outlier here. There are other reviewers, Patrick, the Cyclist Hub, I think his name is, Dave Arthur, all agree with you. But I look at all those riders and I wonder if they're similar weight.
The beanpole.
Yeah, similar to a beanpole. I'm obviously 80, as you said, less seat post. And I did find it comfortable on normal sort of city roads, smooth roads. But as soon as I went out the back, I did a 180K loop on this. The bumps and divots, given the stiffness of the frame, given the fact that there's no drop seat stays, and given the fact I'm, as I said, running a shorter seat post to accommodate my stumpy legs, I was just copping it in the arse.
Yeah.
And
Like we should cut that bit out. It's a little cut.
So
use that as a sound bite.
I feel, if you're not taking it on those roads, you're probably not going to know or experience that. So that's why I've rated it a 3.5.
Very interesting.
Out of 5.
Yeah, totally different experiences from the same bike.
Yes.
Here we are. Yep. That's
Speed.
why we do this. I suspect it's probably not the fastest frame I've ever ridden in a straight line, but it certainly wasn't the slowest. This was kind of, I rode it on some really fast local bunch rides, had no issues. I didn't feel like it was holding me back. I certainly found it faster in a straight line than my regular bike, which is a lightweight climbing bike with round tubing. The one thing that we both found was downhill. It was a little bit sluggish, we think, because of the sticky free hub on the back wheel.
It's a very noisy free hub, the noisiest I've heard, and it does feel a bit sticky. So, as you know, I tried it with 3 different sets of wheels, a much better set of wheels, so the bike felt amazing, the Creatives.
Yes.
And then a more price-aligned set of wheels being the Fastsport 60s.
Yep.
And this morning, in horrific Noosa conditions, I tested the wheels, and the Fastsport wheels with the DT Swiss 240 hubs were faster on average by 2.5 seconds up the local climb, and I only got one run on the descent just due to various reasons, but it was about 6 seconds faster on the descent as well.
And I certainly, when I rode it with those wheels, felt that as well. So potentially, we're not talking so much about the frame here, but probably differences in the wheels. But I would give it a 4 for speed. It wasn't exceptional, it wasn't bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll give it a 3.5 out of 5. A bit harsh for my ratings here at the moment. The main thing for me is because it doesn't have that beefy, muscular aero profiles, I'm not getting that sort of speed in a straight line or the sensation that you typically get with a more beefier, muscular aero frame. And then up hills, because it carries a bit more weight and maybe because of that sticky free hub, I'm not getting the sensation that you can sort of carry with an aero frame into a climb at say 3, 4, 5, 6% gradient. I feel like the speed starts to rub off.
I certainly felt that as well.
So those two things combined, 3.5 out of 5. With better wheels though, I'd probably give it more of a 4. Handling.
This is top marks. I really like the way this thing handles. Like I said before, with the geometry considerations, it's just got normal everything. The wheelbase, the head angles, the fork rake, it's all pretty stable. I threw it down some pretty good descents with a fair bit of braking and hairpins and rough road, and I found it really stable. Plenty of grip from the tubeless tyres.
It does have a longer wheelbase actually. You talk about normal geometry, but compared to like a Cannondale System 6 or like even a SEKA Exceed, it's probably 10 mil longer in the wheelbase.
I think this one was about, was it 980 or so? Yeah, it was potentially on the long end of normal, but certainly not very long. It certainly wasn't 1,000 mil or anything like that. But I found it great. I found it really planted and stable in terms of cornering stability.
Holds its speed.
Holds its speed, yeah. No, I had no gripes. I thought it was really, I think planted and stable is probably the best 2 things I've got to call it. And I would probably give it a 4.5 for handling.
I agree with everything you said. I'm going to give it a 4.5 as well. Practicality. So practicality is like the practicality of being able to do things on the frame easily. ignoring the fact the industry's gone with integrated front ends and disc brakes, which are both not practical.
Yes.
And also the practicality of being able to get support.
Yep.
So how would you rate it?
So we got a local distributor in Australia, which I think is great. The eminent adjustability of that back end, the seat post and that sort of stuff. I got to give it a 5. It's very practical. Yeah,
Really?
It's really good. It's,
Okay.
Yeah, as long as the warranty issues are handled well locally and that sort of stuff.
I'm going to give it a 4, mainly because they don't have a local bike shop network. If they had a local bike shop network where it was a bit easier to get support, then I'd be more angling towards a 5. The other thing is, I think, you know, they have received a bit of criticism, this company, over the COVID period, just due to being able to get, you know, keep up with supply and demand, and also some warranties. Patrick dropped a comment under our last video, who sort of reviewed these frames, had a lot of feedback from customers, so they lose half a point for that as well. But I think that's not so much a Yoeleo thing, perhaps just an industry thing. But
it could well be. Yeah, I haven't been privy to those details, but certainly...
I'm reading comments, don't worry about that.
You're reading those comments, mate. You're diving deep.
Yeah. And the final one, value for money.
Value for money.
And before you answer, I'm going to give you some prices here. So this is 3,000 Australian dollars, 3,500 if it's painted.
Yep.
Custom. SEKA Exceed RDC is 3,800. Winspace T1500 is 2,300, and an Elves Falath Evo is 1,800. This is Australian dollars.
For $3,000, you're starting to compete with other sort of mainstream brands. You're starting to get up near like what you can get a TCR frame, that sort of stuff on special for. And I think it's probably a little bit more than I'd want to pay for it. So I'm probably going to give it a 4 because I did find it a good all-round package.
Okay.
But if it was price point aligned, I would if it was around that $2,500 mark, I think they'd probably get through a few more of them. They'd be a better option.
I'm with you on that one, but I'm going to give it a 3.5. So total scores combined, we'll put them up on the screen, and your summary statement.
Summary statement: good all-rounder, nice handling bike. Not the fastest thing in the world, not the slowest thing in the world.
Yep.
But a really good all-rounder.
I would agree, and perhaps not suitable for stumpy, hip impingement,
heavy-set
beefcakes on harsh roads. So if you've gotten value from this video, if you've enjoyed it, please don't forget to give it a like, helps the channel out, and we'll catch you in the next one.